Hello and welcome to Krigsadam Age of Sigmar. Welcome back, dear friends. Like you can see from my trophy here, it's a silver book familiar chaos thing. I managed to score second place at Krigsluntan Grand Tournament. Unsurprisingly, and like I predicted, I got screwed over by the secondary objectives. Essentially, Krigsluntan runs the Games Workshop's secondary objectives, the 18 ones from the last General's Handbook. The problem with using these secondaries as essentially tiebreakers is that several of these secondaries are you can complete them automatically, basically. And I was unable to stop several of my opponents from completing their automatic secondaries. And since Krigsluntan had a scoring system where not only completing your own secondaries but preventing your opponent from completing his was necessary to achieve overall victory, I was unable to get all of the points in the tournament necessary for a first place finish. What happened basically was that several opponents picked the secondary where they had to complete a charge from 9 inches away. This is very difficult to stop when you're facing Idoneth Deepkin or anyone with a +1 or +2 to charge or reroll to charge or whatever. Essentially you have to charge their whole army before they can attempt to charge you, which is impossible when playing OCR Bone Reapers. Secondarily, other people use the secondary called Secret Mission, where you have to take a hero on your opponent's table edge and then move him off. The problem with this secondary is that it can be completed in the same turn that you summon a hero right up at the opponent's table edge, or alternatively bringing in an Idoneth Deepkin Soul Scryer and then removing him. So essentially it can be completed in the same turn that you bring in the hero, thus making it impossible to stop. Third, another one that's very difficult to stop is the one where you have to have a unit in all 4 table quarters. Since if you're playing against, let's say, Change Host, they can take the first turn, place a unit in all 4 table quarters, and voila, victory, unstoppable. I complained several times to the Krigsluntan GT organizers, that would be Oscar Karlfred, and told him that this system was shite, and he essentially ignored all of my concerns and told me to, well, basically screw myself. This is not unlike Oscar, who regularly tells me to go screw myself. With this minor problem, a Slaanesh player managed to get past me. I didn't play any games against him, but he managed to get 3 more points since he was able to stop his opponent from completing their secondaries more efficiently. I guess that he hadn't established my reputation for being an asshole, so people were more generous to him as far as secondaries went. In this episode today, I want to walk through all my 5 games in Krigsluntan GT. I want to talk a little bit about the winner and the 3rd place finish, about the tournament generally, and of course of my disagreements with the honest wargamer. Let's start off by talking about the event generally. So Krigsluntan this year was organized in a very nice hotel venue with a bar available and with the hotel rooms just around the corner. It was a very well organized event. Apart from my disagreements with the tournament pack, the event itself was very well organized. And I have to say that the venue this year was superior to last year's. especially for those of us who played all of their games at the top tables, since I heard that the farther in the room you got, the worse the air quality. But the top tables were close to the exit, and since I played all 5 of my games at the top tables, I wasn't disturbed by any poor air quality and could focus on my games. Secondarily, the technical side of everything was run expertly by Magnus. I mean, there are 3 tournament organizers for Krigsluntan. There's Oscar, my nemesis, there's Magnus, and there is Jonathan. And whenever I asked Oscar about something, he said, "Oh no, that's Magnus and Jonathan's area of expertise." And whenever I asked Jonathan about something, he said, "That's Magnus and Oscar's area of expertise." So you have to conclude essentially that Magnus did all of the work. I mean, apart from moving some boxes and commenting on the streams, Magnus was the man of the hour. And great kudos to him, because it was very well run. I've had multiple disagreements with Oscar in the lead up to this tournament. The area of secondaries was one. The second area of disagreements is his spotty conversion policy. Essentially, he said that all armies have to be legible. You have to see which unit is what. There has to be a uniform color scheme. The bases have to be done in a similar fashion. And all units, essentially you should use Games Workshop models or something really similar. And he's been really strict about this to me and my friends, telling us that you can't use that, you have to base it like this. And then when we show up to the event, basically it turns out that this has only applied to his friends. He's used these strict measures to rein us in, but the other players at the event could bring basically whatever they wanted, including armies that were converted 100%, such as the army playing with Caroliner infantry and the army playing with basically pine cones, playing as Sylvaneth. So I don't mind people using converted armies, but there has to be some standard, Oscar. If you want some people to adhere to a certain standard, then you should apply the same standard to everyone else. And the problem with Oscar is that he finds enjoyment in cruelly torturing his friends and then letting everybody else get away with basically anything. Well, Oscar is basically a wanker. Well, like you can hopefully tell from my comments, I'm a very close friend of both Jonathan and Oscar. Jonathan and me, we grew up in neighborhoods next to each other, deep in the Swedish woods. If you're interested more in our mutual backstory, you can watch the Honest Wargamer episode where we delved more into our friendship. Oscar is a more recent friendship. We met at a tournament in 1999, so we've known each other for 20 years or so. And we are unbelievably tight. I mean, I was there at the christening of his daughter, and I was the best man at his wedding. So therefore you have to accept that a certain level of animosity between me and Oscar is to be expected given our long relationship with each other. Well, moving on to the games themselves. So first off, I was playing this list, displayed on the screen. My Osiark Bone Reaper list. Well, I had mainly 2 objectives playing this army. The first was to get more comfortable with the Osiark Bone Reapers. I hadn't played any games before this tournament, and I wanted to get a feel for how they play as an army, how strong they are, essentially what kind of role they can play in a team environment. Since I'm the captain for the Swedish European Team Championship team, I want to get a feel for what different armies can perform against other armies, so that I am better able to assess lists when they start rolling in next year. My secondary task with this army was to assess Catacross. Is he a good general for this army? Should I play with Archon? Should I play with Nagash? Should I play with regular Liege Cavalos and and the regular Bone Reaper heroes. Is he viable? Is 500 points too expensive for this little bastard? Or is it just right? And I have several important pieces of data about this army. First, it's unbelievably resilient in close quarters combat. So I had a 40-man unit of Mortar Guard. I had the Reinforced Battle Shield spell cast upon them, so they had a 5-up extra save instead of the regular 6-up. And then I was charged in turn 3 by an Idoneth Deepkin army. He had managed to accrue 5 command points, since he had access to a piece of commanding terrain, and Katakros was unable to steal any command points from him. So he put 5 extra attacks on his unit of 6 eels, and then he charged it in alongside another unit of 3 eels, another unit of 3 eels, and his Achillean king. So essentially, these 6 eels had 5 additional attacks each. All of the eels strike first at the start of the combat phase, so I could not use my shield wall ability, since that is also used at the start of the combat phase. So basically, he was able to dictate the entire flow of this combat, and he made all of his attacks, and he zapped all the eel bioelectric shocks, and after all was said and done, I lost a little more than half of the Mortar Guard. So Idoneth Deepkin player bringing everything he's got against my 40-man block, and he was only able to kill 23 or 24 of them. And then on the return, I gave them +1 rend, +1 attack, since Katakros was standing right next to them. And in retaliation, I killed 4 or 5 of his eels. So essentially, the Mortar Guard are almost impossible to bring down in close combat without the heavy use of mortal wounds or exceptionally high rend. I don't think there was any time during the tournament's 5 games that my Mortar Guard felt threatened in melee combat. The only time that they suffered severe damage was when fighting against a Tsentian change host. Moving on. 5 games played. The first game I played was against a player called Danalf. It's like Gandalf, but without the G. It's a G instead, Danalf. He was a young lad, must have been about 15 or 16, going to his first ever tournament. He had brought Beast Claw Raider list, basically, of course using the Ogre Mortribe book, but it was a Beast Claw Raider oriented list. He had 3 Stonehorns and 3 units of 4 Mournfangs. I started off by informing the poor Danalf that I'm the best player in Sweden, and so he shouldn't expect much from the game. And basically he agreed with me that he was going to get his face smashed in. So we agreed to take a slow, nice, relaxed game. Of course, Danalf decided to screw me over on the secondaries, taking the 9-inch charge secondary, and then lining all of his Mournfangs and Stonehorns 9 inches away to make sure that he got it off. That wasn't very nice, Danalf. But his charges essentially came to naught. The Stonehorns, the Mournfangs, nothing had enough damage to seriously threaten my Mortek blocks. And secondly, my excellent Mortar Crawlers, my catapults. During one particular nice shooting phase, they managed to kill off one Stonehorn, going from completely uninjured to dead in a single salvo. I mean, I used Katakros to give both catapults extra shots, so they had 4 shots each. But still, it was a very unlikely result, but very satisfying. At the end of turn 3, Danalf was basically wiped off the table to minimal losses on my side. I mean, it was about how I expected it to go, but Danalf was a very good sport, and he didn't complain too much about his fate. I mean, the thing is, in tournaments like Krigsluntan, the first round, since Krigsluntan, due to my animosity with Oscar, disallowed grudges, I was trying to get a grudge in on another player, but they refused it because Oscar actively dislikes grudges. So I had to face a random player. In a 90+ person tournament, facing a random player is most likely going to end up with you facing a beginner or an intermediate player. Given that in a tournament of 95 people, maybe 20 or so are experienced players, another 20 are intermediate players, and the remaining 50 are noobs. So that gives you a great odds on facing one of the beginning players or one of the players who doesn't take the game as seriously as I do. And unfortunately, Donalf was that guy. He had to be ritually sacrificed to the gods of the tournament. I can't say that I drew any lessons against Donalf because his list was very skewed, with the fact that he basically only ran Stonehorns and Mournfangs. But enjoyable nonetheless. I mean, it's always nice to grind someone into dust. After the first game, which was finished in record time, I walked around the venue looking at other games, and I stumbled across the most amazing game ever. It was Sebastian Hedberg, also known as Bassan, a legend in the Swedish scene, especially due to him winning nicest player, most sportsmanlike player at multiple tournaments. So this is a really nice guy. I mean, he has taken a dark side recently. He's become increasingly hostile and violent, but still probably nicer than I am. He was playing a very soft Beasts of Chaos list. Basically, Sebastian never plays anything that's too competitive, that doesn't agree with his humors. So he was playing a very soft Beast of Chaos list, and he was facing off against Anders Gustafsson, the 9th age player. Let me give you a little bit of backstory here. So Anders rolled onto the scene maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago, starting off making his entrance with a great challenge to the Swedish community, basically calling all of us wankers, losers. He was going to smash us all into dust. He was going to win the first tournament he ever competed in. I wrote extensively with Anders because I thought this was a funny dude, and he was extremely confident. He said that, Adam, you haven't faced real miniature wargamers yet. Age of Sigmar players, they are noobs, they are losers, they can't play. If you try to face me or my friends, then you will know real terror. We are the best that the world has to offer. I mean, we wipe our asses with this English top players. Naturally, I was mightily impressed, and I thought, oh my god, this Anders guy, how can I kill him? How can I bring his list down? And I prepared several strategies for facing him in turn 4 or turn 5 or something. But Anders was faced off with Sebastian in the first game. The thing is, Anders was playing a Gottrek and Eel list. So, and being a very inexperienced player, I mean, he has played extensively in previous editions of Warhammer, but he was very inexperienced in Age of Sigmar. He didn't realize that if he put all of his eels off the table, the Beast of Chaos player could bring all of his gores, ungores, bestigores, etc. in along the table edges and essentially block Anders off from even entering the table. So through expert ambushes, Sebastian was able to keep Oscar off the table for most of the game. And when Anders joined the table, he didn't have enough time to win because Sebastian had managed to accrue such a massive lead in game points. So Anders basically lost against the nicest player in our scene. For me, this was poetic justice. I mean, the biggest, the biggest braggart from the Ninth Age scene coming over to show us how it's done and being defeated by the most sportsmanlike player in the Swedish scene. I mean, this is amazing. This is the stuff that legends are made from. I think that probably they should have given Sebastian his own award for bringing down Anders. I mean, Anders was a good sport about it, but I could tell that he was smarting. This was not what he expected. He expected a top 10 finish or something, and now we ended up somewhere in the mid-tables because of this game. Sebastian is a legend. I observed several other games, checking out possible competition. And after finishing the round, we all went out to lunch and had a really shitty lunch. There was a lot of bragging from the tournament organizers about how nice the restaurants were around this venue. So we went to what looked like a nice restaurant, but it was incredibly bland and expensive. So thank you for that, tournament organizers. I think it's incredibly important to support our tournament organizers in the Swedish scene. They do an amazing job with very little thanks, very little resources, no monetary benefit. But at the same time, it's very important to call them out when they disappoint us. So therefore I'd like to make a special point here of calling out Oscar for his sometimes subpar restaurant recommendations. Most of the time, Oscar is a culinary virtuoso, and I would trust him with picking a nice Chinese restaurant any day of the week. But his lunch and dinner recommendations for the Saturday, they did not live up to the high expectations that I had of him. That's all I'm going to say about that. After lunch, it was time for game 2. I was fortunate enough to face Dennis Palmquist, who was playing the 120 Sisters list. I mean, this is a really strong list, captained by a really strong player. Dennis is very experienced in the tabletop wargaming scene. He's a old friend of Anders Gustafsson, and they had been preparing together for this event, but unfortunately for Dennis, he wasn't expecting the OCR Raped Ring to show up. We were playing the Gifts from Heaven, Star Strike, something, whatever, and in a pretty dense city terrain, I deployed my dudes in a nice little line on the table. He deployed his dudes in a very complex multi-tiered formation with the interlocking fields of whatever. And I of course gave him the first turn, whereupon he dropped 2 units of Shadow Warriors right next to both of my catapults, fired at the catapults, causing no damage, charged the catapults, missing both charges, and then both of my catapults fired at his Shadow Warrior unit, wiping them off the table. It was a great start to the game for Dennis, who sighed audibly at this turn of events, but claimed that it was all part of the plan. The first meteor dropped on the right side of the table from my perspective. Dennis seized the initiative, rushed forward, grabbed it, and then made a Sisters of Slaughter 6-inch pile to put me in combat but not allowing me to strike all that much. This would be Dennis' tactic for the entire game. Using the Sisters 6-inch pile to put me in combat but never allowing more than 3 or 4 or 5 mortar guards to strike. This was a really good tactic because, as it would turn out, the mortar guards absolutely slaughtered the witch elves and the sisters whenever they got their hands on them. So he tried to delay me, but some brilliant tactical maneuvering from my side, retreats, charges, shooting, you name it. And a few turns later, the game was basically mine. The Star Strike scenario is one of the more controversial ones in Age of Sigmar because of the randomness of where the meteors land. The meteor landed off way to the right side, while I was expecting it to be somewhere in the middle. This was beneficial to Dennis, but it wasn't enough to secure him a victory. To secure a victory for him, my meteor would have had to land far off to the left, and it didn't. It landed off slightly to the right, allowing me to use the same units to protect both the middle and my meteor. His meteor landed exactly where he wanted it to, straight in his back line, protected by multiple units of witch elves, hag queens, etc. So the Star Trek scenario has the potential to save and basically screw over a player. I'd say the meteor landings favored Dennis, but it wasn't overwhelming. And in the end, the thing that won me the game is that he didn't pick Mind Racer. He didn't have any Rend on the Witch Elves or the Sisters of Slaughter, and he was hesitant to commit his Hag Queen on Cauldron. Because of a secondary requiring him to protect her. If he had picked some other secondary and instead thrown her straight into combat, I think she could have done a lot of work for him, because the one combat phase where she was in combat, she absolutely slaughtered the Mortar Guard. Rend 2, multiple attacks, high damage. It was vicious, but in the end, the Witch Elves and the Sisters just couldn't penetrate the Mortex's shield wall, and I kept getting 3 models back each turn from Catacross, and basically he was killing 3 models a turn, so we were in a stalemate that he was slowly losing, because every combat phase he lost 10 Sisters and I lost 3 Mortex, and I replenished my Mortec and he couldn't replenish his sister, so it was a slow grind that he just couldn't win. It was a valiant effort from Dennis' side, but still a loss. By this time I was feeling pretty confident about my list, so I was immensely looking forward to see who I would get to squash in the 3rd round. And lo and behold, it was the vice captain for the ETC team and captain for the Six Nations team, Jonas Fredriksson, and his Skaven, Jessails, Plague Monks, whatever, that I would face. I was really excited by this, since I haven't played Jonas in a tournament game before. And I was eager to establish dominance over both the ETC and Six Nations team by defeating him. Immediately upon realizing that he would be facing me, Jonas let out an audible sigh of despair. And things just went downhill from there. Here's the thing about Age of Sigmar and any board game really. If you go into the game with the attitude that you can't win it, that you're going to lose, you will lose. You will ignore opportunities for winning. You will surrender mentally, and that will lead to your defeat on the tabletop. And this was Jonas' problem, because he knew from my reputation and the strength of my army that he was basically fucked. And even though the tabletop, the terrain, immensely favored him, because there was this castle straight across the table, which blocked my line of sight for the catapults, and this scenario had a deployment zone like this, which is very, very tight. I mean, this is, what's it called? It's not the border war. Battle for the Pass. The Battle for the Pass with the wonky deployment. And this wonky deployment forced me in behind the castle, so I couldn't see his Skaven at all, basically. My catapults were unable to fire at anything efficiently. But realizing that I wouldn't be able to fire at anything efficiently, I had another strategy in mind against Jonas. So I put my catapults basically with the butt open at the back of my line, because I knew that Jonas had a Vermin Lord Deceiver. And Jonas obliged me by teleporting his Deceiver behind me and charging into the Mortar Crawlers. And this was the key thing, because I was afraid that he would strike the crawlers, lock out and kill one of them. But here's the thing about Jonas' mental attitude. He was basically surrendering already in his head. So he piled the Vermin Lord into the Mortar Guard and struck them. This was a really, really bad move, because he killed like 3 of them, and then they retaliated, putting 8 wounds on the Vermin Deceiver. I would recommend for anyone watching this video and facing the Ossiarch Bone Reapers, if you're going to attack the catapults, you have to do it in force. They can take quite a beating, and with ambushing units like the Shadow Warriors or Vermin Deceiver, I don't think trying to kill the Mortar Guard is a very good idea, Jonas. So I'm sorry about that. He basically whiffed the whole thing. It was my turn. I retreated out both the Mortar Crawlers outside of out of combat and ran them towards the side so they would be able to fire if I got a double turn. And then my Mortek basically slaughtered the Vermin Lord. So it was priority turn 2, and things were looking nice. I had killed the Vermin Lord. Both of my catapults were had a nice line of sight to fire, and it was a very important roll-off, because if he won, his Jezzails would be able to wreak havoc. Naturally, I won this roll-off, and I fired the bravery shot from my Mortar Crawler. And I got to roll 1 die for each Jezzail team. 9 Jezzail teams meant 9 dice. Each 4-up meant 1 dead team. 5 4-ups later, and his team was absolutely wrecked. He went from 9 to 4 Jezzails, and that's something that he simply couldn't recover from the rest of the game, because the thing about Jonas' list is that the only high-rend threats he has are his Jezzails and his Vermin Deceiver. And with both of these out of the game by turn 2, it was an uphill struggle for Jonas. He charged 40 Plague Monks straight into my 40-man Mortek block. He assisted by charging in some Clan Rats and what have you, and it simply didn't work. He killed like 10 or 12 of the Mortar Guards, and on the return strike they killed 26 of the 40 Plague Monks, and that was basically it. The rest of the game was a big mop-up operation to clean Jonas off the table. At the end of the game, he was very depressed. I could tell from his eyes that he was very depressed because they were downcast and he was mumbling. And I realized at that moment that his will was broken and that I am now in the ascendancy in both the ETC and the Six Nations teams. I was feeling pretty triumphant by now, so I decided to go celebrate with my friends, bragging a little bit along the way. I went out, and like I already said, it was a very disappointing dinner restaurant. I had a very bland burger, and the soda was very expensive, so I quickly beat a retreat and went home. For the second day, I showed up early, because psychological warfare is very, very important in the game of Age of Sigmar. So I went around to my potential opponents and put the fear of God into them. Basically, I told them, yeah, I raped everybody yesterday, you have no chance, the Mortar Guard are unstoppable, etc, etc. And it was pretty effective, actually. The one thing I did not count on was the fact that I would be facing a Dane. A Danish person, and it was Alexander Hansen, a very proficient change host player. The problem with facing a Dane is that he hadn't been listening to any of my trash talking. He didn't view my last video. He couldn't hear me trash everybody and everything because I was trashing people in Swedish. This was a big mistake. In the future, I will trash people in English, so I have a broader reach with my trash talk. Anyway, Alexander's will wasn't broken. In fact, he was pretty confident in victory. Naturally, this caused me to get very stressed out. Possibly drinking 2 cans of Monster Energy also contributed to me feeling stressed out. But I think it was mostly Alexander. So, what was I facing? I was facing a change host. And everybody who's faced a change host knows that they put out a lot of mortal wounds. And I'm not that keen on suffering mortal wounds with my Mortex, especially since Alex would be getting the first turn, since he outdropped me. So he picked the first turn. I didn't have any of my buffs up. I was pretty scared by this time. And he started throwing endless spells left and right. Balewind Vortex, Spell Portal, the Purple Sun, the Ravnak Snashing Maws. And I was suffering mortal wounds all over the place. And the worst of it was his Purple Sun hitting the catapult with a 6, causing 8 mortal wounds to it, leaving the catapult almost dead. And then he finished it off with another flurry of spells. So I only had 1 catapult, which was a major problem because my entire strategy against Alexander relied on my catapults. Anyway, he then fired up his Gaunt Summoner, unleashing hell on my 40-man Mortic block, killing 22 or 23 of them with 1 single spell. He kept hitting me, Infernal Gateway, Bolt of Siege, Firestorm, Unstable Mutation, everything. Mortal wound after mortal wound, and when the dust settled, only 5 or 6 of the Mortar Guard remained alive. But this was key, and this was the beginning of Alex's downfall. Because those 5 or 6 Mortar Guard that remained to me at the start of my first turn, they would be key for the entire battle. At the start of my turn 1, I was in a very, very bad position. When my main Mortic block was almost wiped from the table, 1 catapult was dead, the other catapult was undamaged, but still it's just 1 catapult. My poor Soul Mason was being chased around the table by the Purple Sun. I was in a bad spot. Basically, at this point, I went for a Hail Mary. I rushed up both of my 20-man squads up the table, and I fired my catapult at his Gaunt Summoner and succeeded in killing him. This was very important because I could not have survived another round of Gaunt Summoner fire. My small 5-man squad was bolstered by 3 to 8. Ran forward and killed his Herald. His Herald had teleported forward using the Change Host ability to nuke me. But that put it in range of my small surviving squad. And they ran forward, charged and killed this Herald. Very important for me. The 20-man squads both rushed up the table, not doing all that much because they were too far away, but still rushing up the table. And basically I was betting everything on winning priority for turn 2. And I did. Thank heaven. So we rushed forward, kept on rushing, kept on pushing, and basically slaughtering horrors all over the table. We killed pink horrors by the dozen, blue horrors by the hundreds, brimstone horrors by the 300s. Basically, I cleaned off most of his horrors in this turn. Unfortunately for me, we were playing Blood and Glory, so the only thing he needed to win was to hold all 4 for 1 turn. And he tried to do this in turn 2. You can only win in turn 3, but if he seized all 4 of them at the tail end of turn 2, he would then be in control of all 4 at the beginning of turn 3 and win. So he summoned in horrors, capturing both of my home objectives. He still had one of his home objectives, and I had a 20-man squad holding his other home objective. So now the game was all about whether or not Alexander could seize my last objective, his second home objective. He summoned in 60 blue horrors, lining them up to charge, and then he started hitting me with spells. Infernal Gateway, Bolt of Siege, Firestorm, and here's the key thing. In an amazing turn of events, I managed to dispel his Gateway spell. How can you succeed in dispelling a Siege spell, you may ask? Well, he had run out of Fate Dice by this point. So he's basically rolling, and he rolled a 1 and a 2, which is not enough. So he rerolled the 1 from his command ability, rerolling it to a 3. So we had 3 and 3 plus 1 was 7. And I managed to roll a 9 for my dispel. This turned out to be a major deciding factor because all his spells only managed to kill 5 or 6 of the Mortar Guard. Unfortunately for him, I removed the 5 Mortar Guard that were closest to him, so his 9-inch charges turned into 10-inch charges. And he rolled 6 10-inch charges, only succeeding in 1. And my Mortar Guard killed half of that unit after it arrived at the objective. So he was 2 or 3 models short of grabbing the 4th objective that would have netted him an instant victory. Well, now the priority roll for turn 3 would be the deciding factor. I was, of course, nervous, but I decided to roll first since I'm that kind of guy. So I threw the dice, and it came up at 2. Well, at this point I thought, well, basically at this point I'm fucked. Alex, good game, etc, etc, etc. And I was thinking about how I was going to explain it on my stream. I would call it a unfortunate turn of events, bad dice luck, cheating Danes, etc. And then he rolled and it came up a 1, so it was mine. And that basically meant game for me, since my 8-man Mortex squad was now bolstered to 11 or 12 or whatever, charged his Lord of Change, killing it, and then my Mortec hordes marched across the table and seized eventually all 4 of the objectives, because at that point he had no heroes and thus couldn't bring in any more horrors. So I cleaned basically everything up and we shook on it. It was a very engaging game, and I think maybe 3 or 4 times a single die roll, I mean, succeeding in one or more blue horror charge, or pulling off that Infernal Gateway spell, or winning turn priority turn 2 or turn 3 would have netted Alexander the game. But in the end, the thing that he didn't plan on was my will to victory. You see, the person who is most mentally prepared to win will often have things falling into place for him. I mean, if I had, for example, Jonas' attitude of, oh, I'm going to lose, then I'm pretty sure I would have lost that priority roll. But since I was so determined to eke out a win, the dice followed my initiative and turned up to be whatever I needed them to be. I don't think you should discount this. I mean, the ability of your willpower to influence the world around you. Anyway, having smashed Alexander, I moved on to the 5th turn, and to my delight, I was facing Lillan, another member of our ETC team. Lillan also surrendered basically the second he saw he was facing me. And I can't blame him, because he was playing Idoneth Deepkin, and this is the thing I talked about earlier in the video, where he charged me with his entire army, and it didn't amount to squat. Basically, it was game over even before it began. But he made a decent showing, he made a decent attempt at it, and in the end, it didn't work out for him. I'm sorry to say, Lillan. Lillan, by the way, means small guy, and that's pretty apt because Lillan is a small guy. In my last video in Swedish, I talked about how Lillan frightens me with his very dour appearance, his mustache, his hat, etc. But I think beating him on the tabletop has forever dispelled my fear of him. I think now I see him more as a servant rather than a fearsome opponent. In summary, 5 nice victories. The secondaries screwed me over. Let's talk a little bit about some other games that were very interesting. Well, the talk of the town, so to speak, is Fred Andersson, who played Ogre More Tribes, won his first 4 games, basically 20-0, all of them. And then in the final turn was brought down by Thomas Slanish. Well, first we have to add that Fred misunderstood the glutton rule that gives them an extra hit on a 6, and he confused it with the Iron Fist that gives you a mortal wound on a save roll of 6, and he thought he got mortal wounds on attack rolls of 6. So for his first 3 games, he was causing a lot more mortal wounds than he should have. I don't know if that influenced any of the games, but you should keep that in mind. Still, it's an amazing achievement to go win 4 games with a basically glutton heavy list. And I think if he hadn't faced Thomas Slanish in the last turn, if he'd faced Lillen or Rodemar's Iduneth Deepkin or the Corn guy or whatever. I think he could have eked out a win and maybe got in second or third place. And it would have been well deserved. I mean, when you place highly in a tournament, there are two aspects to consider. Of course, placing highly, it requires a certain level of skill. Not just anyone can end up in a top 3 finish at a tournament with 90 plus players, but you also have to consider the list. And his list wasn't the strongest of lists. And in fact, the third place finish, the Corn list, also wasn't the strongest of lists. So we'll talk about that in a moment. So this Ogre list basically was 36 gluttons. I mean, a moving wall of flesh. It's a fearsome sight across the tabletop, seeing all of those fat dudes rushing towards you, yelling obscenities. I mean, I think that would have been a nice army for me to play. Unfortunately, he faced Thomas in the last game. Now, Thomas probably wanted to see if he could win this tournament, and he really wanted to win. And if you really want to win a tournament in the meta right now, you should play Slaanesh. And if you really want to win with Slaanesh, you should play Silesk. So that's what Thomas did. And there was some minor controversy after the tournament about whether or not Slaanesh is out to win or not. And I can assure you that Slaanesh is not automatically a victory, even if you play the Silesk list. I mean, it's playing with the odds in your favor against almost anyone. Let's not discount the strength of that list. But I think that if I had faced him with my catapults and morticard, etc., I would have had a decent shot at winning. And there are other people that I think also could have taken him, so I don't think it's an automatic victory. Still, if Thomas really wants to earn my respect, he has to repeat this. I mean, finishing 5-0 with a less powerful army next time, because he's shown us that he can win given a strong army now. Let's see Thomas if he can win using a slightly weaker army. Cities of Sigmar, Orc War Clans, Ogres, something. And you'll win my respect forever. And of course, there are two great honors to strive for in the Age of Sigmar community in Sweden. One is winning Krigsluntan, which you did. The second is earning my respect, which you have not yet done, Thomas. So I think you should try and win my respect next. The third place finish was a Corn list, which I wasn't very kind to in my review, and I still stand by that. The Corn guy, he had a pretty easy strength of schedule. I mean, the strength of schedule measures how hard your opponents were. I mean, how they fared in their other games. And the Corn player had a 10.5 strength of schedule, which meant that his opponent on average earned 10 points a game. My strength of schedule was 13.5, so my opponents on average earned 13.5 points per game. So that's something you should strive for and look up to, Mr. Corn. But still, winning 5 games with that list, I have to take my hat off to you, sir. That's quite an achievement. It was 4 Bloodthirsters, some Fleshhounds and some Skull Cannons. I mean, if Sileski is up here, and my list is here, and Fredde's More Tribes is here somewhere, then that Corn list was, I mean, below the table. Basically here, around knee height. So, I mean, you have my deepest respect for that achievement, Mr. Corn. I forgot what your name is. Something Norwegian? Norlander? Umeå? I don't know. Anyway, you are one step closer to victory as well, since this victory earned you my respect. Now you only have to win Krigsluntan next year, and you will have completed the 2 most important tasks in the Age of Sigmar community. Let's talk about some other people. Well, my protege, Alexander Sikovsky, I was hoping for him to go 4-1. He certainly had a list that was powerful enough to go 4-1. But the thing about Alexander is that he lacks the mental fortitude to win. So whenever he he encounters difficulties, he gives up. He sells his army, he buys something else. He doesn't have the will to stick it in the game and eke out a victory against massive odds. And in the end, he lost 3 games. Losing 3 games with that list, Alex, I mean, you never had my respect to begin with, but whatever shreds you'd managed to attain, you've lost by this point. It's good for you that you are an excellent, you are very good at recommending Serbian cuisine, or otherwise I would have to sever our relations at this time. Some of the people that disappointed me, my cousin Samuel. I thought this guy was going to end up in the top, and he didn't. He lost a game with his daughter's list. And the funny thing is that I predicted the exact way he would lose in my list video. I said, this guy has the potential to win, but he will get fucked over by his poor time management skills. And guess what happened in his 3rd game against the change host? Against the change host, the slowest of all armies, he managed to run out of time and subsequently lost because of running out of time. Samuel, I think that to prepare for the next year's ETC, you should bring a chess clock to all activities in your life. You should use the chess clock in the bathroom. You should use the chess clock when you're eating. You should use the chess clock when you're sleeping. Basically make all your activities center around keeping time, because that is your major weakness, my friend. Incidentally, I played with the chess clock in 4 of my 5 games, and neither me nor my opponent was ever close to running out of time. I play my games essentially in 2 of the 3 allotted hours, and this left me time to walk around and talk some smack. Some comments about the honest wargamer, Rob. Rob was commenting on the streams, and during one of the games he got bored and started panning his camera out into the crowd, and he focused on me, and he said 2 very nasty things about me. First, that my ice runs through my veins, and secondly, that I have a lot of rage in my heart. And I think both of these comments are very unfair. Rob, actually, I'm one of the nicest guys in the Swedish community, and most supportive of new players. In the last 3 weeks, I've spoken to over 20 people over Facebook, helping them with their lists, giving them tactical advice. I won't out them because it's very brave of them to come forward and talk to me, and I don't think I should out them to the shame of their compatriots. But I'm a very powerful institution in the Swedish Age of Sigmar scene, and I think you should have recognized that, Rob. I think, unfortunately, your vegetarianism clouds you against recognizing greatness in people who eat a lot of meat. Moving forward, I think this exercise in making videos has been a success. I very much enjoy making this video series for you guys, so I'll keep on making more content. I'm thinking about maybe running a battle report and maybe some army book reviews. And if you have any ideas of things you would like to hear me talk about, please don't hesitate to comment or send me a message on Facebook, and I'm always happy to help my fellow wargamers get better at the game.